Welcome, and thanks for joining us for our Workday chats today. I'm Katie Coletto. I lead the HCM product marketing team here at Workday, and I'll be your host for today's Workday chats. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the comments below. We have both KPMG and Workday folks engaging in the discussion. So let's start today with a little inspiration from our friend Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers of America. If you don't know who he is.
My friend.
So he says, when you're finished changing, you're finished. Do we want to argue with that?
Not going to argue with the guy who flew a kite in a thunderstorm. Feeling pretty good about what he's saying.
Feeling pretty good about that. Okay, good. And even though he said it hundreds of years ago or 100 years ago, right. It's really applicable to today because we really talk a lot about change in the world of work today. Mm-hmm. And this, how do we navigate this massive change that's going on, not only for HR, but for the entire organization. So KPMG actually helps all of us. They've been doing research on this future of HR for now 21 years. They just published their annual report. So that is why I am so lucky to have Mike DeClaudio joining us here in the Workday studios in Pleasanton from both of our hometowns of Detroit to talk about big bets that HR is making for 2020 and what is the path to success in the coming years. Mm-hmm. So let's start out by talking about kind of what are some of the big investments that HR is thinking about right now in terms of where they're investing their time, their energy, their strategy.
Sure. So thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. We've been watching kind of the HR space for a long time, both as kind of a research kind of project, but also because we work with HR functions around the world. And our lessons have been there's always a sort of a cohort of organizations that are right at the cusp of what is going to become the primary set of objectives for HR practitioners. So what we try to do in our research is find that cohort of individuals and really understand what it is they're doing and try to go deeper and deeper in subsequent years about kind of what they're doing that we can have sort of the main body of organizations follow and learn from. So we call those folks pathfinders. The name of our research this year is about what path you'll take. We talk a lot about this cohort of pathfinders. There's 4 things that they do. That are pretty consistent with where we're projecting the future of the HR function to be focused in the next few years, call it 5 to 7. We think it's not like far-fetched. We think they're actually very tangible, grounded things to be focused on. So one is around workforce insights. Okay, what's that? This isn't reporting. We're not talking about like enhanced reporting. We're talking very much about gleaning as much data as possible and learning as much as we can in real time to drive decisions. They're using that to help reinforce a culture and a purpose of the organization, and the HR function is really invested in driving and reinforcing that culture and that purpose. They're thinking about an employee experience from end to end beyond just what HR can control, but the entirety of what the worker experiences on a day-to-day basis. And they're doing all of this to really reshape the. Oh, we're not even done yet. They're doing all this to really reshape the workforce, so that they can match and meet the things that are going to be focused from a business perspective for your organization. How are you going to make money? How are you going to add value to your customers in the future? So wow, that's a lot, but it really kind of distills itself into kind of 4 areas that have some nice harmony and some good lessons from some of those really early adopters. So those are the
and when you were talking, we were talking before this session, you were talking about the pathfinding organizations actually investing in all 4 of these areas, not 1 or 2 that kind of gets them ahead. Can you talk a little bit about that and that combination?
Connectivity, sure. So yeah, there's a lot of organizations who have invested really heavily in, let's call it, workforce insights. So I'm going to get really good at understanding what my employees want. They do employee engagement surveys. Like the most common form of getting insights and analytics into experience is still an employee engagement survey. Once a year, you go in, you fill out like a 15-minute survey. Fine. The lesson from that has been you spend a bunch of effort to glean that insight, but you don't really have any mechanism to pull it through. right?
what do you do with it?
So what do you do with it? So
Yeah,
you've got
that's
like
all the
a
employees saying, I
culture.
filled it in for the 5th year in a row. What happened?
And yet.
Okay.
And yet. So
And
you've
yet.
got like a culture, like what's that Peter Drucker thing? You got a culture that eats all that data for breakfast. Like, well, that data's nice, but we're not going to listen to it. And we'll come back to that concept. You don't necessarily have the remit as an HR practitioner to control a lot of the things that are driving why an employee might be engaged or disengaged. So that's that experience piece. And you really don't have any way of thinking about how your engaged population stays with you and is relevant to you over time. And so the notion that you could invest in one area or even one or two areas is a great start, but it's a start. And that's the Ben Franklin thing. And there's a real need for organizations to kind of think about this systematically. That if I get insights, I need to have an experience that's informed by those insights and a culture that reinforces what I'm learning, and it's all for the shape of the workforce going forward. So that's
so it all works together.
Exactly.
1 + 1 = 3.
Sure.
Or 4 or 5.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about workforce shaping. That's kind of a new term.
Yep.
One that I kind of heard for the first time reading this report. And I had thought about it as really kind of the org structure. What is the structure of the workforce? I know we're going from very much a hierarchical organization to more of this dynamic teaming and disbanding of teams. But you guys took it farther than that. So
Sure.
I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are around this workforce shaping and how that plays out today and into the future.
Sure. So there's a lot of, it's really, if you were to look up like future of work, or future of jobs. Open another tab right now. Keep this one open. Open another tab and take a look and type in future of work.
150,000
so
responses.
150,000 responses. If you did a quick scan through, you'll see there's some fairly consistent thoughts here. There's a lot of recent information and a lot of recent kind of thought leadership around what has some people are calling the atomization of work. Okay, what does that mean? If you think about your job today, and think about all of the skills that it takes to do your job and all of the tasks that you do and your interaction with other, like humans in the workforce, or cameras in this case, then really what you're doing is identifying opportunities for development, right? So like these are things I need to develop and grow.
Right.
There's also opportunities for automation, right? Because automation isn't built as job replacement, it's built as skill replacement.
Okay.
So if you think about jobs as a series of tasks and a series of skills, you could say, right, I can automate part of your job, but I can't automate these other things. Well, I'm not just going to like pay you less to do the same thing, and I'm not just going to ask you to do just like less work. So I have to like rebuild those jobs.
Okay.
And I have to do it again. And then I have to do it again. And all of that sort of building, you can do it from what you have today, right? That's for sure. And we've been doing that for a long time. It's called workforce planning. The leading organizations are out there going, wait, if I think about, because this disruption thing, as it turns out, is like a tidal force. Like all of our boats are going up and down right now. If I think about what my company is going to have to do in 5 years, what are my services to my clients that help them get value, that help me return value to my shareholders and my stakeholders? Is that different than what I have today? And if it is different, in like vast majority of companies it will be different, suddenly I need to create new skills, right? So Goldman Sachs opens up a retail banking arm, right? So you can go and you can open a checking account basically at Goldman Sachs. That's a new offering.
Right.
They needed new skills. They made the decision to do that years ago. They needed those skills to be able to run and manage that type of skill, that type of capability to their customers, right? It didn't just grow, so that it wasn't accidental. So they made a purposeful choice to start building that talent and buying it from the street. And it was based on a future strategy and working backwards. So you see examples of that. And what we're advocating leading HR functions doing is saying, right, our company's going to make money this way in 5 years. I got a bunch of skills that help us make money this way in 5 years. So I have to change the skills so that we can actually do the thing that we want to do.
Got it.
So
So
we're
it's
from
looking
Detroit.
at the end point.
Looking at the end point. So like we're from Detroit. Okay, what's big in Detroit? Cars. Great.
And watches.
And watches. And cars and watches. Let's start with cars. Cars are, if you follow the automotive industry right now, there's two big trends. You're electrifying the vehicle, so it's going to be a battery-powered car, not a gas-powered car, and the vehicle's going to start driving itself more and more. Great. What does that mean? If you work in the auto industry right now, you're used to building a gas-powered car that someone who's over 16 with a license can drive. There's a lot of consistent skills and capabilities to driving an electric car that can, in some cases, drive itself. And then there's some skills and capabilities that have to be different, right?
Yep.
Completely new. So the question is, how do I build those skills? Where do I have to buy them from other places? And where do I have to kind of borrow them in joint ventures and things like that?
Yep.
And you see all of those things happening right now in like the auto industry.
Yep.
So you definitely see it happening. And our advocacy is for HR functions to really get into the mix and drive that dialogue.
Okay. And really look at a strategic plan for reskilling versus doing it on a tactical level of
Precisely.
baby steps at a time.
Or in like a fire drill mode, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my
Like,
gosh,
get ahead of it, it's
I
coming.
need to launch this thing in 6 weeks. We need to go and hire a bunch of people. Like just-in-time hiring, you do
Right.
it at a premium. You're not always sure about fit. You're not always sure about culture.
Right.
Yeah, there's an inherent risk to
Right.
that.
Well, and there's also a lot of, I mean, the car example is a great one, the obsolescence of those skills as the technology changes. And so I think what we're seeing from a lot of our customers is this perspective that they want to make sure they're not leaving their employees out in the cold.
Right.
That they are taking care of this shift,
Yes.
helping their employees make this shift into this newer world with different demands on our jobs.
Totally. And like HR practitioners are smart. Like we intuit this just as HR professionals, right? Like even if you don't my spidey sense is tingling. And this is why, so in the last 2 years, we've been asking questions about upskilling and like learning modes and burst learning and learning on demand. And what we found this year was like the big, in 20 plus years, this is the highest percentage. It's over 2/3 of companies have said upskilling the workforce is a big priority for us. And it's not just like taking you from job A to job B. I'm going to make you all coders. It's about always building new and discrete skills that complement your old ones and that replace ones that are no longer necessary. And that's, learning aptitude is,
It's a big change.
it's a big change.
And the ability, we're hearing it all over the place, excuse me, in HR, is this idea of managing around skills, around looking at people as a set of skills and a set of skills to be developed. So
Precisely.
super interesting stuff to get. So as we think about skills, we think about this learning that's happening in an organization, a lot of that is cultural for an organization, whether they are investing, whether or not. And I think, you said that I think it was 95% of those pathfinding companies said that culture, no, that was employee experience.
Also important, but keep going.
Culture was at the top of the CEO list for the
Correct.
first time this year.
Correct.
In the report.
Correct.
I got to get my stats right. So talk to me about culture. Is culture this amorphous thing that just happens? Or is it something that an organization can manage, can drive, can shape?
Yes.
All of the above.
Next question.
Okay.
So the construct with culture, and particularly with when we work with CHROs on culture, it's everyone's responsibility, and then we all have specific responsibilities. So there's a construct of we, as a leadership group in the organization, as managers in the organization, as a new hire out of college in the organization, you all have sort of citizen responsibilities to both uphold, reflect, and frankly contribute to the culture of the organization. Some people have disproportionate ability to influence what the culture is, but the reality is culture is like the Hands Across America thing. Like everyone sort of contributes to it. Where HR plays in like over 70, I think it was 71% of pathfinding organizations believe that they have a duty to the organization to drive the cultural agenda. And 4 out of 5 of them built like specific cultural, like kind of tiger teams or SWAT teams inside of their organizations to really focus on culture. And what they're doing is saying, right, if it's culture of learning, I need to make sure I'm looking at opportunities for people to grow and develop, and I'm rewarding them for that. So maybe my rewards mechanisms aren't always based purely on direct delivery to the bottom line. Maybe it's the ability to meet learning objectives. because you learning a new skill this year, while it maybe didn't directly contribute to the bottom line, we believe as an organization that skill is going to be so relevant that I want to reward you today for having that skill today.
So that gets into culture, actually can support the more strategic initiatives of the organization.
Yin and yang.
Moving, okay.
Totally.
Yin
Yeah,
and
it's a
yang.
really
Right
symbiotic
on.
thing, right?
Okay.
So like but it requires, right, HR to be able to not just kind of create and curate those kind of processes and systems, to be able to look at the way you do things like performance management.
Right.
But it also requires HR to have really good insights and analytics on, like, look, we said we were going to disproportionately reward people for values. We didn't do that last cycle.
Right.
Why? And here's the data that shows we didn't do it.
Right.
And that's now the HR practitioner's job, is to sit, and if you're wondering what strategic HR business partnership looks like, it's that. You didn't disproportionately reward values like you said you were going to. Here's the data that proves it. Here's my recommendation on what it should look like going forward. Let's have an open and honest dialogue with business leaders about why we aren't rewarding against our culture and our values. Like, that's the dialogue, right? And like, wow, sure sounds simple, guy on my computer screen, but what we're seeing, back to this pathfinding organization construct, is that's what they're doing. And when they build those specific teams on culture, that's what they're focused on.
And they're able to take action on culture initiatives.
Bingo.
Okay.
That's it.
Got it.
Really?
I think so. So
Sweet.
I think we do a good thing. I don't know if I told you about the Workday, what we do here at Workday, which I think is a great example of it, is both analysis and reaching out to those managers. So we do a pulse survey with a great place to work every Friday. Everyone answers 2 questions, 17-week cycles. But as a manager, if I'm really falling short on something I'm supposed to be doing from a cultural perspective, I actually push out a training class to me. Talk about like instituting culture and systematizing culture.
Right.
It's really interesting so that I can then get better at whatever I'm falling short at.
Right. So that shows you have 2 things, right? You have a culture where technology is leading the way inside your organization, right? So you have a cultural attribute that says, I trust technology to be able to help curate and create those types of examples. But then you also have a culture of learning, because instead of punishing you, like, Katie, people aren't having fun.
I know. Get
right?
on it.
Like, get on it.
I
It's much
know.
more about, we see an opportunity. We're going to close the gap for the opportunity. That's the thing we're focused on.
Yes.
And that, I mean, that's an amazing example
really cool.
of how culture really can be brought to life with HR in the forefront.
Yep. And HR driving it, being the stewards of it. Agree.
Bingo. Totally right.
And so then I think another piece of culture that we're seeing rise up, and this is the 95% stat, is around experience. And so many organizations thinking about creating this great experience, whatever that is, for their workers. So I guess I would love your insight on how to define this experience. What is experience? I mean, is experience every touch point with an organization?
Sure.
Is it just your touch points with HR?
So we've been talking about consumer grade employee experience for a while, right? What does that mean?
What does that mean?
The best way to say it is, if you think about maybe there's an amusement park you like to go to, or maybe there's an airline that you like to fly. So let's take the airline example. You get on a plane, there's a whole bunch of micro experiences you have. There's the seat and the comfort of your seat. There's whether or not it has Wi-Fi that works. Spoiler alert, it kind of sort of doesn't always. There's
the
whether or
friendliness
not,
of the gate agent.
there's the friendliness of the gate agent, which actually has a disproportionately large impact. There's the friendliness of the flight attendant. There's whether or not the pilot said hello to you or goodbye to you when they walked on the plane. There's whether or not you took off on time. There's and we could go on and on and on and on. But the construct here is your experience is actually, if you pivoted this, and if there's anyone that works for an airline on the other side of the screen right now, you're probably going, that's like 87 different departments.
We
right?
appreciate you, by the
And
way.
we appreciate you. But that notion that there's so many different parts of your organization that control
The experience.
the experience that your customers have becomes a problem. So what have we done? We've created customer experience groups, and we've created customer experience officers. And what have they been doing? They've been going around and like herding the cats about trying to get everyone and saying, look, this is going to be the standard for our customer experience. Okay, let's apply that to the employee experience. So let's think about you as an employee. If you're an employee, probably, you're thinking, okay, well, HR controls things like how I was hired and onboarded and what I get paid and my performance management. It doesn't really control the majority of my day-to-day, unless you're in
Good
HR.
point.
But like the majority of your day-to-day is done in the systems that you work in. It's done with the clients that you work on. If you're customer facing, we have great stories of people who try to build really good physical environmental, but miss like social and digital components. And so what we look at is environmental, social, digital. You have to be able to do these three things, balance them out. And if you're thinking about, I'm going to have an amazing human capital system, but I'm going to be running my financials on a green screen, and I'm going to be asking, my first year and second year and third year financial analysts to be doing like T accounts and like compiling things from manufacturing sites by hand, that's not a great experience. And one could argue. And a lot of times, so let's say those people leave, right? And they leave and they go get more money. And we're like, well, let's just give them more money. And now, but we're not addressing the reason they're leaving.
Right.
Which is their digital experience back at home doing the work they wanted to do wasn't cared for. Right. And so what does this have to do with HR? And the answer is what we're seeing with these pathfinding organizations, and for HR leaders watching this on the comfort of the screen, the construct is like you kind of have to get into everyone's business now. So you become the chief employee experience officer, right? So you have a chief customer experience. You become the person who is the clearinghouse for
the advocate.
The advocate for the employee experience. So it's not just the things you control as HR, but it's the totality of the way you think about work, of the way you think about your environment. Like how many folks in HR control the environment? Not many, but if the physical work environment isn't up to par, you're going to have a heck of a time maintaining folks, right? Like and I know you guys bring like dogs to work, so like there's like an element of, but you see how that is positively reflecting people being able to bring their whole selves to work. That's an environmental thing, right? Was that your CHRO that decided that? Was that the business that decided that? Like, great, that's the rhetorical question. And the construct here was a CHRO can look across environmental, social, digital, and help curate the right experience for people.
Okay.
And help drive business leaders to make changes that they're responsible for, that reinforce.
Creating. So they're bringing experience up to the forefront, up to the top of mind for every leader in the organization.
Yes.
And from a digital perspective, it seems that, a lot of people don't equate business systems with consumer friendly.
What?
I don't know. But from an HR perspective, there are things that HR does control explicitly around experience, around making that intuitive, frictionless.
Totally. The system, the process, the approvals, the review steps, all of it, right? There's absolutely stuff in HR's homeroom that HR can control. But what we're seeing, like, that's good, the great, is then HR is trying to influence the rest of it and set a standard, right, for the rest.
Yeah, I like it. Get out of your playground. I like it. Keep getting everybody's business.
Or bring everybody else into your playground.
Bring that
maybe
sounds better. That sounds better. And be inclusive.
Right.
Wrap your arms around. Okay, so then the last area you talked about in the report, and you kind of touched on it earlier this morning, was insights.
Right.
And we're looking at, with technology, the HR function has access to just vastly more data than they've ever had in the past. We might, data analytics and data science has not historically been a core competence of an HR kind of your department. So what's shifting there? How does the HR function wrap their arms around all that data?
Let's hire data scientists.
There aren't that many.
There aren't that many.
You got to reskill some people
and
to get
they
there.
are tired. There's a few things here. There's the first challenge we give to a CHRO. So we're big fans of like coming into a CHRO's office and being like, you know what you need to do. And one of the big challenges we say is, you have a chief marketing officer or you have a head of sales, and they know a bunch about your employees, about your customers, right? They know a bunch of things about real customers, about prospective customers. If you have a social media app like Instagram, suddenly you follow a couple things, you like a couple things, and you're like spending half your take-home pay using Instagram, maybe that's just me, on like buying stuff that they're, yeah, that's right. So the construct is, we know so much about how people behave and what they like and what they don't like by them just passively telling us using their behavior, right? So think of like, every time you're on a keyboard, you give off what you might otherwise call like exhaust, like digital exhaust, right? Like exhaust from a car, but it's digital and it's from you. And if I harness that exhaust, I can see all sorts of behavioral patterns. I can see what you like. I can see your preferences for buying things. I can see, now apply that to being an employee. I can see your preferences for when you start work and stop work. I can see who you work with and who you don't, based on things like email trail or Slack channel or text messaging. Or I can see when you work. I can see your preferences on travel. I can see your preferences on, all sorts of, whether or not you like, pens or pencils. Like there's all sorts of data points. Some of them are relevant. Some of them are not, right? And that's the data science. So the first construct is like, let's not confuse real insights and analytics with reporting.
Okay.
So a lot of organizations, when we talk to them about insights, they're like, oh yeah, we do an employee engagement survey, and I compare my employee engagement survey to my comp ranges. That's really good insights. And I was like, that is good data, but what we're talking about is something a little bit more advanced, dare I say, and using a lot more data. Some of it is stuff that people are going to tell you, and some of it's stuff that people aren't going to tell you, but you're going to find out about them anyway. And that type of information leads much deeper in insights and analytics. So that's the first construct. There's a
it seems like the trick is, how do you actually extract the valuable information? How do you find it?
Right. So it's not just finding it, right? So like, let me separate the wheat from the chaff, right? So like there is definitely that. I get all this data. How do I actually make sense of it all? But then once you've made sense of it, and this is where we run companion surveys, we run a CIO survey, and we run a CEO survey. So this year we said, let's say you have really good insights. Do you trust what the data says, and are you willing to make a different decision based on the data? And the majority of CEOs said, no.
Really?
And that sort of blew our minds.
Interesting.
Or at least my mind. Because the construct was, I believe in the importance of data science. And I believe in the importance of deep analytics. And this is where data scientists like pound the table, because they're like, the data is so clear. The problem becomes data scientists struggle to sometimes tell the story effectively. And then compel an executive to make a different decision that may go against her instinctive reaction or his historical reaction. So that kind of model of building out a framework to get good insights and having a technology infrastructure to capture it, but then taking that data, finding the right data to actually look at, then telling the story and using that story to make a compelling case for an executive to make a different decision. It's everything in the last half of that sentence is where we're seeing the focus.
Interesting. So it's not charts and graphs. It's story.
Totally right.
Very interesting. All right. A lot of stretching going on in the HR
this is like yoga
organization.
Time? This is
HR
yoga
Pilates.
Time. It's Pilates.
It's getting stronger. I'm getting my muscles stronger. So I've got to close up here. I think we have a few minutes left. So kind of advice. What would you tell all of our friends out there on the screen of prioritization or top things to really kind of think about and talk about within your organizations?
Totally. So keep attending conversations like this one, for sure. And it's interesting because, again, from our side of the metaphorical and literal table, it's very easy to be like, you need to focus on all of these things. So let's get real. Probably not right away. These things become monumentally challenging if you have to struggle to keep the lights on. And you have to struggle to deliver baseline capability, right? I have this great story about an executive round table call that happens every Monday morning, and the CIO is talking about all of his big strategic initiatives, and the CEO said, my laptop took 15 minutes to boot up this morning. And suddenly the CIO's big strategic initiatives were fix the CEO's laptop. So you can't really embark on big strategic initiatives if you got to be making sure you don't even have the data right, or you don't have the processing right. So if you guys if you're listening to this and you're like, this all sounds great, but there's no way because I'm just so busy, then our challenge is find ways to take technology platforms, extend them as much as you can, to automate as much work as you can automate, to create stable data in your organization, to create stable processing in your organization. Give yourself a chance. Build a strong foundation. And while you're doing that, focus on what's your company going to be doing in 5 years from right now to make money. And ask yourself the question, what do you got to buy? What do you got to build? What do you got to borrow? What can you use bots for to get there?
I like it. That sounds doable. That sounds like a good first step.
First steps.
And think about both the technology, the change management, and you can get there.
Totally right.
Awesome.
You can get there.
Well, I would like to thank you for joining us, for flying out here to our beautiful sunny California.
Totally.
When
pleasure.
your kids have a snow day at home. Just putting that out there.
Yeah. That's a sore topic right now.
And thank you all for joining us today. And please join us on the next Workday Chats.